And welcome everyone to the May 2nd International Women's Writing Guild bi-monthly open mic feature with Imani Tolliver tonight as our guest reader, her poetic memoir, her memoir in poetry and verse. And we're so excited to hear from her tonight. And my name is Kelly Dumar, and I'm on the board of the International Women's Writing Guild. And I moderate the bi-monthly open mic. And right beside me is Katarina Konin, another board member of the International Women's Writing Guild, who always backs me up and helps me out as co-host here. And she's going to share the list of our open mic readers as you come. She's got a couple of things that would be really helpful for you to do to help make her management of the list of readers tonight work effectively. So Katarina, you want to tell everybody what you would like them to do?
Yes, hello. So it's helpful to me if you change your screen name to whatever you registered to read under. So if the name on the registration for your reading is your first and last name, then it's good to have your first and last name on your screen. And that will allow me to check which of the readers are actually here. We always get some cancellations and some no-shows, and that brings us right down to the number of readers we can actually accommodate. So I'll be checking through the participant list right as Kelly and Imani are speaking, and then I'll come up with a finalized list of readers uh, based on who's here.
Wonderful, thank you so much. What we do with the recordings of our open mic features is we post them for the public on YouTube with the permission, of course, of the panelist, of the reader. And so that should be available in the next couple of days, just in case you want to share it with anyone else. And let's see, just a reminder, 3 minutes is what we ask you to read for. We do time the readings so that it's in poetry, prose, any genre. Anybody is welcome to read, but we do ask that you keep your reading to 3 minutes only. So I time them, and I may have to stop you if you go over 3 minutes. And everybody knows I hate to stop anybody, but I will. And you'll never take it personally, and you'll always come back and read again, because no matter what, we all occasionally run over in our enthusiasm and excitement to share. We're so grateful to have all of you listeners here tonight. And I'm just really excited about tonight. I'm really happy and grateful to our own Dorothy Randall Gray. Dorothy, how long have you been a member of the International Women's Writing Guild? Approximately. You're muted. Go ahead and unmute. You're still muted. All right, I asked you unmute. There you go.
I think about 37 years.
Okay, Imani, there's the answer to that question.
Wow.
Yeah, I joined while I was still in my diapers.
Sure.
And,
Of course.
and even then, it seemed like a worthwhile organization.
Yes, thank you so much. If there's anybody here who's been a member longer than Dorothy, then put that in the chat room and try to beat her out. I also want to introduce Leslie Neustadt, who's on our board and produces our bi-monthly featured of Free Write. And so that's just such a fabulous program. I'll allow Leslie later on maybe to say a few words about that, but you don't want to miss that. So in case you've never been introduced to the Free Write, it's another one of our fabulous free programs that you may want to check. And of course, Juanita Curtin is another one of our board members, a little newer than Dorothy at 37 years. Juanita, how long have you been a member of the Guild?
Just a couple of years, but I attended with Dorothy back in the 80s. So it was just wonderful. And I've always remembered this program and this whole group. And so joining was just like coming home again.
Yeah, so back in the 80s, my goodness, we're 44 years old, everyone. So as a writing organization, Mary Ann, how long you been a member? Approximately.
Okay, approximately 6 years.
Okay,
But
good.
I'm a longtime fan, well, of the Guild. Kelly, Dorothy. Hi, Dorothy. Woo! So this is a joy to be here tonight. So I'm not an old timer, old timer, but I love the Guild so much. I've been with you in my heart forever.
Well, thank you so much. We're grateful whether you've been with us for 2 weeks or 7 years, everybody. So in the chat room, I forgot to mention, we keep the chat room open throughout our event tonight, and we love to hear from you. Say where you're from. Imani is from West Hollywood, and I'm in the Boston area, the greater Boston area. So please feel free to say in the chat room whether you are a member of the International Women's Writing Guild or not, how you heard about us, and where you live, and anything else you want to. I know there's a lot of people here tonight who've been coming regularly, and we really appreciate that. But feel free to say hello and say what you appreciate about the reading of each other, what you appreciate about Imani's reading. Feel free, the chat room is open. All righty. So I'm going to introduce Imani now. She's going to read first. Then we're going to have a discussion with her about her work, and then we're going to go to the open mic. So she's going to be reading from her book, Runaway, tonight, and I'm going to introduce you a little bit to her background. Imani is an award-winning poet, artist, educator, public speaker, and event producer. An interdisciplinary artist, she's a collagist, watercolorist, doll maker, and jewelry maker. She is a Kav Khanum Fellow and served as Poet Laureate for the Watts Towers Arts Center. She's also been recognized by the City of Los Angeles for her work as a promoter, host, and publicist in support of the literary arts in Southern California. Rooted in social justice, Imani has curated and produced a wide portfolio of arts and cultural programming that celebrate, reflect, and amplify the voices of diverse communities. These programs have included arts festivals, poetry readings and slams, concerts, youth and community theater, and special events for large municipalities in Southern California. So one of the things that I wanted to say in introduction to Imani's reading comes from a quote from the LA Review of Books that has an article about an interview that is done with Imani. And one of the things Imani says in this article is, the poems I'm afraid to read, I must read. The poems I'm afraid to write, I must write, because there's someone in the audience that may not say anything to me, but I see them looking at me and I see them sharing, me too, me too. There were plenty of Me Too moments that night for the award-winning Kaveh Khanum Fellow who honed her voice in call and response settings like the stage. Runaway traces her artistic journey from Degnan Boulevard and the corridors of LA through her family's bookshop and the beaches where she rested when she fled her parents' home. The book is full of sense memories of loss and victory, of Black hair and coming out, of the artists and places and spaces that make Imani who she is. The LA Review of Books goes on to say, reading Runaway is good therapy, heart opened, assumptions challenged, mind blown. You feel a little braver and more connected to your own truth. At least that's what it did for me. And speaking with her was no different. Here's an excerpt of their 2-hour conversation. I'm going to put that in the chat room because after tonight, you may decide you want to go and read this wonderful interview with her in the LA Review of Books. So, Imani, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Kelly, for such a thoughtful introduction. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Dorothy, for connecting us together. I'll look here up at the camera because even though I'm moving my head around, I'm actually looking at you all in different places on my screen. So shout out to my mother, Evelyn Davis, who's here watching and listening. And since, especially I think because this is a women's organization and a women's space and a safe space, I just want to thank my mom for supporting me throughout my poetry career, even before I knew that I was a poet. She bought me my journals, and decade after decade, pouring in all kinds of truths that were really difficult for her to witness. And I'm grateful for her holding space for me in that way, and all those pages for all these years. So thank you, Mom. I'm going to read 3 poems for you today. 2 of them are in my book, Runaway, and one is a slightly newer poem. The first one is called These Hands. My mother said my hair was like moss, difficult to comb into the pillow at the crown of head. She melted it fine and pulled it free from itself, thousands of nooses without the knots. I cut the nooses free, gathered and twisted and curled and colored the knots, the forbidden, the embarrassing, the back door, the kitchen, into sun, agate, warm rum, fizzy Mexican Coca-Cola, and North African oil with herbs at the bottom of wide, dolloped vases, beginning as teardrops, fallen now. I took the stories that made me out of the scream of my arrival, the vinyl and chrome couch of 1977, in front of the $6 million man and the Bad News Bears, the girl, the mushroom, tiny, hiding, hooded thing I was, touched I was, in the worst ways, eating tears, eating donuts, eating anything that would fill me. Into someone larger than I could imagine, into someone strong, into backbone and healer, into the visitor who would tell you all about yourself and herself too, into this body without children, except the one that I hold close between my breasts, that I screamed into making, screamed from between the lips that suffered, from between the lips that would not speak, the lips tasted by the lips that would taste hers. Scream, scream, scream. Now, these lips, curved, plentiful, tell and tell and tell. They were told to shut up a long time ago. The voice box, the brown and red voice box that came from 2 brown necks, and 2 before that was called a white girl, an Oreo. Who are you trying to be anyway? They told me the color of my voice before I knew the language to fight back. They told me that I wasn't one of them, far from who I thought I was. White girl, you trying to be a white girl. But all I knew was my mother's tongue. All I knew came from the Alice in Wonderland records that taught me how to read. I tried to abandon National Geographics and dictionaries, Pippi and the mysteries and the magazines for a language that was more acceptable. My mother tongue was a tattoo that I modified, but never abandoned. I read aloud, listening to the nuances I've created, the resonance that burnishes the girl voice with tobacco and time, rum and crying, into this voice you hear now that sings when no one's looking, to Jesus and lovers I trust. I'm looking below my knees now, and there are scars. I have decided to turn the clusters and stripes into constellations. I will have the scars, no, the stars make an order. Make something larger than me or my shins into Orion, Zeus, Mars, and Leo. Take what shame tried to make into your hands and turn it into something else. Change your color to your wish, into something new, something of your own making. Perhaps you will be as proud as I when a new friend remarks to your mother, "You gave birth to Imani?" No, she gave birth to herself. My second poem is, let's see, I don't want to give away the title because that will give it away. How can we make love to the keys, the fingers that pushed out the sweet melody that beat the kink right out of Cicely Tyson's neck? What happened to the oiled cotton courageous? Who did she become? Oddly silent, her story, the darker Greek we've sung. We are not supposed to forgive Miles, supposed to give away his music to the tolerant masses who don't mind the irony of this anti-hero. The sneer that looks as if it holds a limerick holds a lullaby instead, coaxing lovers to open and croon. Should we keep Miles at the gates, begging Peter, wishing the keys from his hands? I think I can forgive him. Forgive him like I do my daddy, a little every day. His hands did not always hurt, did not always push. No, mostly they carried soil, pipe tobacco, and matches, ink from fountain pens, type from the catalogs that he'd set, old books sold with mom, brother from the hospital, tears when his father died. Love from daughters is complicated. Without forgiveness, there's nothing left. No memory that's not stuck to his face. A garden, a record under the hi-fi, sketches of Spain my father had. If I don't forgive Daddy, then I miss all of Miles, all the sticky croon and silver tones that give the slow flicker of low light on water. Both my daddy and Miles are gone now, but they're probably too cool to hang out with each other. As I pull out old photos of my father kneeling with eggplants, I pull another tune from the anthology that is Miles, the puzzle of love these men live. I keep them in just enough light to keep their shape, but not their color, a kind of blue. So my last poem is, for today, is called Donna Summer. Thank God It's Friday was at the top of the LP stack. My best friend and I read the liner notes and studied the illustrations between the folds of this cardboard angel, a double record set, promising a disco salvation, polyester wrap dresses, glitter and long dark curly locks, magenta on lips and cheeks, gold, gold, gold. Disco wasn't the truth exactly, but it was the projection of the dream that everyone was worthy of desire. Her songs were tempera Polaroids, spinning jewel tone mid-calf skirts and Capezio leotard, lithe and charming men co-authoring the illusion. It was 1979. Osco's disco was on La Cienega, but at school, pop-locking brown boys with soft afros beneath Applejack caps cut break beats from side to side with their thumbs. Their hips turnstiling syncopations. Hip hop was on the horizon. I could have listened to Donna always, and I wouldn't have stopped. But at 12, I ran away from home. very nearly into the arms of street commerce. Bad Girl was always on the radio. They bought me white jeans, tight, and cut my hair, my straightened hair, into a small afro, played Donna Summer songs and encouraged me to sing along. Sexy. I started to feel sexy, desirable, not like a dirty heap of flesh to poke, not something that shameful things happen to. No, I was changing the story. I could be powerful, I thought. I could decide who touched me. Money had nothing to do with it. Choice was the currency. So were the new clothes, so were the chips and candy, as much as I wanted from the liquor store across the street. I wouldn't have survived it. I know that now. So many manipulations, so many people touching me, wanting something. What was it that drew them to me? I used to think that I was a dirty key to a dirty that lived in men. It wasn't Donna Summer's fault that her songs were on the radio. It wasn't her fault that predators used her music to convince me that I was making a choice. What choice could a runaway make in 1979? Between getting beaten or heavy hands late at night, my father making sure that my mother was asleep, braiding forever the pure sexuality that was my birthright with him. It's the snare that I unhitch every time. In those days, in the movies, disco was white. But in real life, it wasn't. It looked like Donna Summer. Sienna, bronze, fuchsia, and cobalt blue. That's the way it was. I mean, the way it really was. I strained to see the colors through those hard, hard days. 40 years later, On the Radio came on in the car. I wept as I sang, allowing myself again, finally, remembering my innocent connection to her music, remembering how excited my best friend and I were when we faced each other, smiling widely, our lips, our mouths filled with baby teeth as we sang her songs, the LP spinning between us. Thank you.
Thank you, Imani. Request for an encore. Do you have one?
Just incredible.
Oh, thank you.
Would you be willing to read for us? We're getting a request from the powers that be in the chat room. Would you?
Sure, I'd love to.
Thank you.
Let's see. All right. This one is called First Time. When I was 9, my neighbor and I would play, dolls mostly. She had a Barbie dream house, and I had the style, the vision of stories playing out that we created together. One day, we laid the dolls down and got into her big bed and decided that I would be the daddy in my white undershirt and functional panties. And she would be the mommy. More delicate was she, wearing something pink, softer than what I had on. Kissing is what we must have done, just 2 brown lips pressing, a gentle mash beneath covers, strewn with our clothes and our Barbies. I don't remember how often we did it. I don't remember if this was the reason I came over. I mean, besides my loneliness, and it was a dream house after all. But one late afternoon, our play was assaulted by an intruding big sister whose face read the story of shame and silence that I kept until this moment now. She hissed an order to get dressed, cut the lights on, come out into the living room. It was time for me to go home. go home. Later, after that, when I crossed the street to find her, she couldn't have any company. Or when she could, there was a crowd of big people, people I didn't know, who watched as we attempted to play under their gaze. Now and then, I remember sneaking with her to her dark room with its books and toys, big mirrored dresser holding girl things, heavy curtains, a jewel-toned darkness. It could have been kisses we desperately attempted to trade between us. It could have been a swift peek at her under things, at mine. I'm not sure now. But we found out that we were not smarter than her parents, and certainly not her sister, whose eyes and ears followed our conversations and silences whenever we ventured in the house. In time, I stopped coming over and only saw her from my house across the street. When I was a teen, I'd shoo her white poodle off my lawn and run over the waste he left with the lawnmower. I'd see her sometimes, walking to school, her belongings clutched as tightly to her as her stride forward so swiftly away from me. I wonder what happened to her, the girl from South Stearns Drive. She lived in the house with a big stained glass window. She's a brown girl, tall and pretty, and will remind you a little bit of me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let us, oh my goodness. So, very powerful reading. Thank you. I know it's just been really super. Okay, so that's interesting. It's been really super Bowl connecting for our listeners. So Leslie writes, Imani and I were talking about this right before, so Leslie intuits it. Leslie says, beautiful, you should record your book so your readers can have your gorgeous voice. So Imani, I had asked Imani about that, and she had said she'd been thinking seriously of getting this recorded. So that's exciting news. Which brings me really to one of the first questions or thoughts that I have for you, Imani, has to do with, well, of course, I hadn't heard you read before, and now that I've heard you read, and it seems like performance and let's see, the world stage poetry community. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe how you've learned to read or how you've developed naturally your wonderful presence as a reader in terms of delivering your own work? Because I think it's really connected for people who are here tonight.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's interesting. I think it probably started when I was a child, when I would read aloud to myself. I'm sure that's where it started. Growing up, my mother was in advertising always. And so I always used to pay attention to the ads. And I think she would be in conversation with me about how just the paying attention to the tenor and sound of someone's voice. And we listened to a lot of music in the house growing up, a lot of musicals especially. And my mother is a vocalist. And so I think that just being sensitive to the sound of my voice, and also those Alice in Wonderland records, I mean, reading aloud, making the connection between something inanimate, you know, like a word on a page, with a feeling, the word that the feeling unlocks, was always something I was very sensitive to, I think. So I think it really started there. And I was an only child, so I was 11 when my brother was born. So I used to talk to myself a lot, I think, and just sort of have these conversations with myself and my dolls and this whole little world I would create inside of my head. But I think that in terms of the poetry aspect of it, you know, that's really different. Being by yourself at home is one thing, but being able to read anything, let alone read your most intimate stories, is a totally different experience. So for me, at the World Stage Poetry uh, space, the World Stage in LA. So basically, in I believe it was 1992 or 1993, Billy Higgins, who was a world famous um, drummer and percussionist, and Kamal Daoud, who is a treasure, a local treasure here in Los Angeles. I mean, I really feel like he's a national treasure, but most locally, we really look up to and revere Kamal Daoud. So right after the LA Rebellion, the World Stage was created. It's the World Stage Performance Gallery. So once a week, there would be, Wednesday night was poetry night and still is, all these years later. And there would be a vocalist night and also a drumming night, a jazz night. And in those early days, it was a very tiny group of us. And we were pretty close. There was a lot of, it felt very safe. You know, maybe there would be no more than 10 people in the room. And the space, the performance space at that time was very small. And there was only one rule. There was just, when you got on the mic, you could have no BS. Yeah, basically, it was like, it was called the no bullshit rule. And it was, you know, just come, be yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, they would say it. And after a while, there was a sign. There was like a, you know, a sign with an X through a bull defecating. So it was it was always very clear. So, but that was tongue in cheek, but it was you were embraced. So when I was reading my toughest poems, you know, I always felt like they had my back and they held me with so much love. But at the same time, I was going to school back east. I was in college at Howard University in DC. So whereas I started really reading in LA on my breaks home from school, when I was in DC, that's really where I cut my teeth and learned how to really stand on my own 2 feet, regardless of who was kind of talking back to me, either behind my back or in front of me with a response to a poem that I wrote, etc. So, and that wasn't at the university. That was really a part of the poetry community there in DC, which was diverse and fascinating and tough. I learned to stand behind every single word, every ellipses, every dash, through my workshops that I did at college, through the ways I interacted with my classmates on campus. I mean, I'm not trying to name drop or anything, but Ta-Nehisi Coates and I were there at the same time. Melina Abdullah, who's, you know, co-founder of Black Lives Matter in LA, you know, it just was the kind of environment where you were just held to task and you were responsible for all your words. That being said, that can still be scary.
Sure.
What I learned to do is, and what I tell myself, I always have a little prayer that I say ahead of time. I used to pray that we were all connected in a beautiful and profound way. Now I give thanks that we're all connected in a beautiful and profound way. And if I'm reading before a large audience, or if I'm on like the radio or something like that, I typically will choose one person that I'm reading to, and I just sort of forget about everybody else and just stay present in the words. And that really helps me a lot.
Wow. Well, thank you for that beautiful description, to be responsible for every word and no bullshit. You know, a couple of really strong takeaways. In the LA Review of Books interview, there's also this wonderful explication of how you talk about, I think, the risks of reading certain poems to certain audiences. Maybe I didn't copy. I'm looking in my notes for that. And I think it connects back to this being afraid to read certain poems. And it seems like some of your poems, obviously, in this collection, and I'm sure in others, are challenging for the listener or the reader on some level, triggering. Maybe that would be, the idea. I'm just love to have you talk about that a little bit. So, how do you decide, well, what am I going to read for this particular audience? How do you decide I'm going to read a poem that maybe breaks open into material that is very, very challenging for people?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I think about it quite a lot. I think about where I'm going to read. I think about, the age of the audience, of course. If there's going to be young people there, there's going to be poems, of course, I'm not going to read. Typically, that's not my experience. Typically, if I'm going to read to very young people, I'm always given the choice to read someone else's work, which I often do, and I still have to change it a bit. So I think about the audience, and once I'm clear on the audience, I think about how, if they haven't really seen me, if it's a new community, then I think about reading These Hands poem, the first poem that I read tonight, because I feel like that poem kind of tells my life story in one poem. I feel like it's a good way to kind of introduce myself and kind of introduce where I'm going, where I'm going to take the listener. And honestly, I also feel like, considering that a lot of my work is about, some topics that are pretty tough, about survival, abuse, incest, identity. I often think, well, if they didn't want that kind of poetry, they wouldn't have invited me, because, sometimes I think to myself, like, hi, can you just lighten up? Can you read something, like, be like Mary Oliver, write about a tree, but I will find some way to connect it to something else. So I think about that too, but I think I kind of read the audience. I've been really lucky in that, I'll have a couple options sometimes if I feel like things are getting funky, but like I said, I pray that prayer.
Mhm.
And my intention is that I'm gonna connect with people in a very pure way. I'm only telling, I feel like I'm only telling my truth. And when I look up from my page and I see people in the audience, and if I'm close enough, then I can see if it's a small enough space and the lights are in a certain way. And I see someone often looking at me like I'm telling their story. To me, there's really there's no more sacred an experience than reading when I write something that I used to be afraid to even think,
Yeah.
and then when I share it, and then I have it, it's published. But then the next part of that journey is actually sharing those words with an audience. No artifice, just the story and the words. And to see someone looking back at me, and they're not able to say that's me, but I see it, that's something there. To me, I'm just all about that person, actually, So I just try to be, I try to be and also the order in which I read poems. So I try to take care of the audience. Like, I don't just read like boom, 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 a bunch of tough stuff and like drop the mic. I don't do that. And sometimes, especially when you're in a group of people, sometimes they're worried about me. Am I okay? And so in a way, I try to, like, kind of make light, kind of laugh a little bit, kind of shake it out. If I see everyone looks like they're kind of holding their breath, I kind of say, okay, we're okay. All right. And then I transition them into another story, another poem.
Yeah, such a really touching idea that the audience wants to make sure you're okay. And then in the reality, those of us who are writers, we know that if I can write it, I've survived it. And so
Right,
yes,
right.
I'm really okay. But the listener maybe, like,
Yeah.
as you said, may not have yet really been able to even get to that place of articulating it. So it's so moving, really so moving to have you mention that about just being so attuned to the listener who may be receiving your words, like that message in a bottle. So let's see. Imagine if you can being, so Evelyn Davis, imagine if you can being Imani's mother. She can forgive her father, but I find it difficult even after he has passed so long ago. It takes so much courage. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Evelyn. Oh my gosh. Thank you for your comment. Yeah, that was there's the poem about the forgiveness is very moving, very touching.
Thank you.
So how things resonate, how wonderful your mother is here tonight as well. Kimberly Rose says, it's great to hear it said in that form, something that can feel so ugly and scary. Thank you for sharing. And Dorothy says, yes, Imani writes with courage and truth. I wanted to ask you, as you know, about the strike through in the title of Runaway. So people encountering your book for the first time, and it was like introducing, I said, gee, do I pronounce Runaway? There's this strike through. It's like, what is this? What's going on with this title? And I wonder if you'd say a few words about that, because this is a really unique book. Obviously, it's yours, and it's unique for that. Oh, thank you, Dorothy's showing. Dorothy, put that up again. Go ahead. Okay, Dorothy is Runaway. Thank you, Dorothy. She's giving us a visual, a memoir in verse. And that is the strike through that I was talking about. And now we're going to wonderfully have Imani give us the explanation for the meaning of that.
So it's twofold. So the first part is that years ago there was an amazing Basquiat exhibition here in LA. I think it went all over the country actually, and I remember having a docent tour at the time. I think I was working at a nonprofit organization for youth, and so we were going to see the show together. And I always wondered why so many of his words were crossed out. Like, why would you take the time to create something, write it, paint it, and then put a line through it? So I asked the docent that, and he said, well, where does your eye go first? And so I thought that was so brilliant, because there were a lot of words on a piece, but only the words that were crossed out were the ones that my eyes zoned in on. And I always thought that was really brilliant. And the other reason is because I so often, for a long time, I would call myself a reformed runaway. I mean, sort of being mindful of the exit wherever I was, just to be safe. If the exit was internal, the room was in my head, that imagination that I have. So I feel like I'm just a runaway no longer. I stand, I face, I speak, and most importantly, I listen. So really, I see that as the strike through is really about not being a runaway anymore, but I used to be. And I feel like it's still a process, it's still a default that in some situations, like I don't have to do that. I can just stand. I just think it's a process, it's a healing, I guess.
Yes. Which is where you've taken us tonight so much when you're reading into the healing aspects of it. There's one other quote, Jacqueline Woodson has praised your book calling it an ode to what's remembered, what's left behind, and what moves us forward. I feel like we got that wonderful experience from you in your reading and your discussion
I'm so
tonight.
glad. Oh, just one more thing too about the Runaway. Not just the strike through, but also kind of the design of the book, which kind of looks a little bit like a tiny bit like a uh, Runaway poster, sort of like a wanted poster a little bit. And that is also a bit of a nod to Harriet Tubman, who I'm a descendant of. My mother and I are descendants of on my mother's side of the family. So she's my first cousin 3 times removed, my mother's first cousin 2 times removed. So that's why I also have a quote at the beginning of the book. So just identifying with that runaway spirit was something that would give me strength even. Like I think Harriet is here with me. Harriet is with me on my toughest times. And so I'm proud of that legacy too, as well. So it's kind of threefold in that way.
Wow, great. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for answering that. The answer just keeps getting richer. So yes, wow, thank you so much for reading. I'm going to invite you to take a breath and read what you'd like in the chat room that I haven't already repeated. And I've put your book link, and I will be putting your website link into the chat room just so everybody can have a live link that they can copy, paste, go buy your book. I hope they will. And please stay tuned as we transition, and we'll say some final words to you at the end of the night. But for now, thank you so much. I'm going to return off the recording. And